What a way to end their first mission. The same crowds that yesterday were calling Paul and Barnabas gods are the same crowds that today are stoning Paul. We hear that Jews from these towns where Paul and Barnabas had been previously come and win over the crowds, changed their minds about them, changed the way that they understood them, twisted the message that Paul and Barnabas spoke to them, so much so that they are ready to kill Paul. And so he is brought out of the city and stoned and left for dead. Well, Paul references this passage, this event in 1 Corinthians, and reference how he was stoned and left for dead. And yet, he gets up. They leave, he gets up, and they go back into the town. And what's even more amazing is as they end this missionary journey, Paul makes his way back to all these different towns where he has been previously. So imagine Paul, bruised, beat up, broken, maybe he's slow getting around, maybe he had a couple rocks mess up the bones in his face, he looks different, and here he is preaching to these communities where he has been before, bruised, beaten up, and broken, saying, I cannot help but proclaim Jesus, and encouraging them to remain faithful. How would you respond to someone who had been stoned, who had been beaten up, broken, telling you to persevere in the faith? It's almost the paradox of it. It might have inspired you all the more. If this guy who has been through all of this can still be faithful, how much more can I be faithful? How much more can I continue to remain faithful to the gospel? So we hear about Paul not going back to these communities, not preaching publicly in the synagogues as he did before, but preaching to those in their homes and encouraging them in a much more intimate way. How many of us have been encouraged by friends who have come to our own homes? Maybe not during this quarantine time, but people who have been there, who have stopped by, who have had a cup of coffee with us, who have talked to us over the phone. This is the same kind of encouragement that Paul is giving and Barnabas are giving to these early disciples, being there with them in the intimacy and the privacy of their own homes. And that is where the faith continues to grow. And so Paul goes back to these towns where these people who had won over the crowds in Lystra were, goes back to Antioch, that great community that they had helped to found, and goes back and encourages them. And I can't help but think it must be a both and. Both was he ministering to them, but also he was encountering their faith again. These people who had been instrumental in his own journey of faith, and went back to Antioch to be encouraged by them and their faith. So today, as we are in this time of quarantine, it's easy for us to take for granted the people who help us, the people who support us in moments that are difficult. Maybe they're the people that are living with us and driving us crazy at this moment. But who are those people in your life, like those Christians in Antioch or like Paul and Barnabas, who help you, who encourage you when things get tough, who walk with you like Barnabas does with Paul? Who are those people who encourage you to live out your faith and be faithful to the acts that God is inviting you to today?